What does your hat say, Mac? I can't even read.
Oh my God. It says, it's cool that women want me, but it makes me sad that fish fear me. Really important, meaningful statements to start the pod. I feel really fantastic that I wore this hat. I actually do love this hat. That was great.
I think it's kind of our great chat colors, so I'm here for it.
Thank you. Yeah, I was trying to be on brand in theme.
My head is too big for baseball hats. I can't wear them. I look terrible. So if we do make them, we have to make them extra large for me.
All right, should we get started?
I am happily back in San Francisco, thawing out from the freezing cold of New York.
Angela, the opposite of you, I was in San Francisco, not last week, but the week before. And I was like, oh, I have to be so much more careful, with my tech gossip here, because I guarantee you, everyone around me, works at whatever venture firm or company that I'm talking about. So yeah, there's New York.
Where's the coffee shop to go in New York? In San Francisco, there's the Blue Bottle on Fillmore, and
I don't know what the cool coffee shops are, but I guarantee you, if you go to the Crosby Street Hotel, there are always
yes,
VCs especially doing meetings there. But then you'll also have the celebrity run-in, so it's a very fun mashup of you get your tech gossip with a sign of last time I was there, I think there were some Sex and the City people in the Crosby Street Hotel, which is a little random, but yeah.
Angela, while you were gone, eggs came back, by the way. There was an egg shortage, and Angela would call Costco every morning and ask us if we did the same. No.
Last Saturday, my husband called Costco, and they were we have eggs in stock, and he was literally grab the children, throw them in the car. Literally bought 10 dozen eggs, which we were still working our way through. We've been trying to hand off eggs now, so I'm glad eggs are back. It was a very stressful time for us.
The next inflation barometer is strawberries. I don't know if you guys saw the tweet. I think Jeff Morris said that there was $18 single strawberries from Niseko, or no, is it Niseko or Kyoto?
From Kyoto, resident LA person here. Yes.
Oh yes, that's the Erewhon.
Can confirm. I live 5 minutes away from one of the many Erewhons, which I'm still not over the fact that everybody has all this ado about a grocery store, but okay, I guess. Yeah, they're real. I've seen them. It's nuts.
Have you bought one, Mac?
No, I'm not gonna spend $20 on a single strawberry. Not even for the bit. I mean, they look really good. I'm sure they're delicious. I actually don't know anyone who's bought one, but the first time I went, they were actually sold out. So people are buying them.
Just some of the other stories that we're watching, I guess, one of the things on top that we talked about was Perplexity releasing or teasing Comet. What do we think about that?
I think it's super smart from a product standpoint. I think that if you want to be the default Google, right, or if you're trying to take on Google, Chrome is probably one way that people are really that Google has a lot of entrenchment. At the same time, I just can't remember the last time a browser launch has been really successful. Can anyone think of one? There have definitely been a bunch that have launched recently, but ones that have really stuck around.
I'm so skeptical here too, and I was trying to think of the bull case. And one thing I loved that Perplexity did that was so smart. Remember they did that marketing to college campuses thing where whichever college campuses
it was
the most everyone would get everyone would get free pro. And I was okay, I'm not going to switch my browser unless I'm pulled screaming and kicking over the line. But if they have already sort of captured the attention of a bunch of college age people who are probably much more open to trying new I mean, all of us have been on probably the same browsers for decades, which is kind of a terrifying thing.
I will say Perplexity has taken over my Google usage. I love the product as a consumer and the concise answers. And I think the key thing is a lot of the AI products today, we still don't fully trust the answers. And for Perplexity, the sourcing of those links is super helpful for me to develop the trust with the platform. So I love it as a product. I think the fact that they're trying to own entire search end to end makes a lot of sense from their end. I think the adoption of that, we'll see. They certainly have done a great job from like a consumer product company that like no other company has been able to do in a while. So I'm excited about it.
I do have to chime in on the announcement that they made. I think there was like a commercial with it, and it was like search like a billionaire. And my first thought was, gosh, like billionaire is like sympathy for billionaires is like at an all-time high or low. But yeah, Mac, you said it was Temu, right? Like what's the Temu line?
Temu's is shop like a billionaire. So when you said search like a billionaire, that was the very first thing I thought of. I really love.
No, you're totally right. And I don't think that that's great, or was that even intentional? I don't know.
Shop like a billionaire makes so much more sense to me than search like a billionaire. Like I kind of think of billionaires as like
billionaires
people to do that for them.
Yes,
like they're not like going like logging into their browser and like asking perplexity questions or like do these things for me.
By the way, what happened to the Super Bowl winner for that ad that they ran?
I did see them follow up and congratulate who it was, and then people were like, is it okay that you're like naming who this person is? So it was legit, but I don't know. And so much of the value of that campaign, I think, is like the exposure or the like organic coverage that they would be running something like that, but I didn't really see it get picked up. I saw this tweet last night from Chetan at Benchmark about the like model layer being commoditized. And I think in the last week, we saw like a ton of updates from every significant company. And I feel like something I've been saying for a while that everyone's been poo-pooing is like, okay, like if we're moving towards a commoditization, then I think everything's going to be like at the app layer, which then like go to market and branding and like the UX component of it plays a larger and larger role. And I feel like that's blasphemy in the Bay Area because everyone here believes you win on product and win on product only. But I was really interested in all of the comments and the replies, which people had like a really positive reaction to. They're like, yeah, you're totally right. Like competition is going to be at the app layer. And I was like, okay, when a non-marketing person says it, I guess it'll stick. So I'm super excited to just sort of like watch this conversation evolve and see what happens. I guess like, from like a press coverage side and like a new investment standpoint.
Well, I think that's why it's smart that OpenAI was the first to really show how to build on top of their own models. So like ChatGPT is the application version of their models. Right. Claude is their version of, so they're trying to own the entire stack. I think it's kind of the same analogy as like the Apple Store, and everybody is now monetizing on the app layer. However, when you have like 30 different models, can you have 30 different stores? Probably not. You're going to have one or two stores that people build on top of. So who's going to be the winner in that? And I think that's where the commoditization comes. So I think there'll be few models. I don't think there'll be 30 or so. I think we're kind of starting to see that a little bit with some consolidation. So it'd be interesting to see that market. But yeah, I agree. Like when you look at all the venture money going into all these foundation layer companies, and they're all going into compute, they're all going into talent, and I guess in marketing, who wins? It's probably the ones that are building on top of that.
I saw a tweet and I feel terrible that I can't remember who said it, but the only real moat at the model layer is the ability to raise money, which I thought was kind of a like fun, like it's not wrong, at least for this phase of the AI arms race. But so far, everyone has been very good at raising money. So they're all like canceling each other out. I'm going to push back on the model thing. I think like we're going to probably not see 30 different like maybe more like general purpose foundation models, but I think we're going to see more like smaller purpose built models. And we've actually been challenging ourselves. I have a small fund. We can't invest in like anything that's trying to compete with OpenAI or Anthropic purely from a like that's just such a capital intensive thing right now. But like, are there going to be these like smaller purpose built models to like I think DeepSeek showed us that we can build things like with like far less capital than previously believed, and so it'll be like a barbell. I'm guessing like we'll have like the big platforms. And then you'll have lots of like little foundation models. But Sally, that's your jam. So maybe you are
I'm actually surprised. Well, I mean, I think there was a moment of pause when DeepSeek came out, and then that sort of we forgot about that. And I know, and I guess NVIDIA is reporting today, so we'll get some maybe some forecast on how that's going to look in terms of the compute side. And I don't know. I'm also I'm very bullish on the model side. I just don't think there'll be 30 players, and I think we're starting to see that. But speaking of another company that's raised a lot is Cohere, and I think it was the Information article talking about. I know they were talking about the revenue and they're still growing, but I think the topic that's always interesting to me is secondaries, and so it seems like Cohere is looking to do a employee sale, and I know OpenAI did that a few months ago just to like give some relief to the employees.
Totally. So Angela and I were at a dinner a couple of weeks ago, and like the single threaded conversation was like, if you had like $100 million, what kind of fund would you start? Would it be the same strategy as the fund that you're working at or leading right now? And surprisingly, or maybe unsurprisingly, a lot of people talked about secondaries, right? Like if you had a lot of money, that would be, right now is a really good time to have a secondary fund, which is probably a good segue for our big topic of the day. So I propose this topic for our first great chat, and it is, how are the next generation of legendary GPs shaping venture capital right now? And of course, my brain goes straight to like the branding of the firms versus like the personal branding of the GPs. And how thinking about like in the past, I think when VC was a lot smaller and definitely, I think, under the radar, the firm brands really stood. And you could name, the really big players in the Valley. And now, there are different classes of like, there are still the tier one firms, of course, but there's a growing group of emerging managers, or there's like, kind of like mid-sized funds. And then there's, of course, like the COVID era, really like big push, I think, to go direct and have a lot of these solo GPs or GPs at big firms, start to build their own personal brand on places like Twitter, or like writing blog posts. So I think when we think about the future, a question that we always talk about is like, how important is that? Or is it like a single direction thing where, this is now table stakes in order to be like a legendary investor? Or are we going to go back to seeing like firm brands, take over? And so curious, like Ashley, you're at Upfront this week. I'm sure you're seeing a good mix of emerging managers and sort of like tier one established firm leaders there. What do you think?
Yeah, I know I'm like swimming in this topic right now. So Upfront officially starts tomorrow. There's like the LPGP day and then the bigger tech summit on Thursday. So I'm just going to like the pre-event dinners and breakfasts and happy hours. But it's cool. This is like a perfect example because Upfront Summit is like for Upfront, like a massive firm brand building effort, right? They've actually made, in some ways, like they put all of their marketing eggs in this basket, and I would say like very successfully. And so Upfront Summit being like the boondoggle that everyone wants to attend, and drawing some like A-list speakers, very much accrues to that venture firm, and then sort of by virtue of its partners being part of the Upfront brand, like accrues to the partners. And so it's almost sort of more like the old model of venture where firm brand was sort of the primary asset and value. But then, of course, like you look at who's on stage here, and it's such an example of like individual brand building and in so many different directions. So, have someone like Vinod Khosla, who, of course, built his brand originally as a founder and operator, like legendary, and then went on to start Khosla Ventures. So like namesake venture capital firm. You have someone like Sean McGuire, who works at a legendary brand, Sequoia, but has very much built a brand for himself, and maybe like on a slightly different, like being very political and antagonistic on social media. You have someone like Serena Williams, who actually built a brand as an athlete.
The greatest athlete in the world. Yeah.
Yeah.
But like, what would like somebody who was early in career, right, looking at venture right now, whether they join a big firm or not? I mean, a question that I get all the time is like, do I need to start blogging, or do I need to start, tweeting if I want a career in VC?
Absolutely. I think if you are building your own firm, or if you are not at like a tier one VC firm, you kind of need to have some sort of personal brand or edge. I read a post by Hunter Walk of like Homebrew and then Screen Door at Fund of Funds, I think from this past week, that was something around like like finding great founders is a needle in a haystack. And so like you have to understand like what makes you a magnet for those needles. Because especially early stage investing, and Angela, like your world is so different. But like if you're looking for like really early, non-obvious bets, like you kind of need those people to have a reason to come to you and find you. There are just too many startups out there to like be on the hunt all the time unless you have some crazy like data strategy. So I would say it's table stakes if you're not attaching yourself to one of those like top tier firms where that's going to accrue to you.
Well, Mac, like I remember you started getting really active on Twitter. I feel like, and that coincided with your venture career. Did you feel like that was that just coincidence, or was that like
I started
like
reading
hand in hand?
So my Twitter is not and has never been professional. Dear God, I hope nobody is going on my Twitter and trying to like understand how I think about complex actual topics.
Mac is a great follow.
No, I'm unhinged. It's not like I'm not like I thought. This is
Mac
not
is a liability. Do not follow her.
Correct. Bingo. But I think like the way so you're not wrong though. It's like I started doing venture and then I realized that so much good discourse was going on Twitter. I didn't want to necessarily go and like create a personal brand on Twitter. I had like one super behind the like times. I think like not behind the times, but I think I was like super behind and I think I started too late in terms of like trying to build a personal brand on there. So for me, it's just mostly been like a fun thing where I get to learn a lot and listen to a lot of smart people. I've been like less interested in like sharing, like having that be the vector for me to share out my thoughts. But I do think that like there's a lot of good conversation, particularly like in and around venture happening on Twitter. So like even if you're not building a brand on Twitter, I think it's a really useful tool to understand how like a bunch of different perspectives. And also I think like as a VC, something that I noticed that was different when I was like doing VC versus like operating is I was spending a lot less time with people who were like in the weeds on topics. And so one way to get sort of like a cheat code version of that is to like follow a bunch of aggressively smart people who like to be in the weeds and who don't necessarily like to answer VC calls, and to go direct and hear different perspectives. And I thought that it was like deeply educational, but yeah,
I think it also, I mean, it works as from a founder's lens. When we were building Rave and we were building multimedia foundation models, we gravitated towards people that were talking about that space, that were interested in the space. And I think it's similar to the advice I sometimes have given founders when they're trying to look for reporters that they want to talk to, is you want to go to the people that are truly interested in the topic, because they're going to be the ones that are going to engage with you. And it's similar, especially when you're talking to emerging funds. I love talking to some of the partners at these smaller funds that were in expertise in the space, because they understood what we were building. They were excited about what we were building. And so I think it's really important, especially, and obviously like Helen and Ashley, you guys have done an incredible job building your own brands and your own expertise on social media. And it like founders really understand that. And I think that's how you start to like really grow the expertise and lane in that field.
I feel like I come from the totally opposite end where you guys all have a social media presence and I have none. Present podcast.
Angela, that's the biggest flex that anyone can have.
That's because you guys don't know what Angela's meme account is, what her and all of the Anon accounts are managing. You guys don't know.
I actually run all
Angela, did you start Bitcoin? Is that what you're telling us?
Yeah, my name is actually Satoshi, but you heard it here first. But I think it's actually maybe a reflection of where the industry has gone. And so if you're a new person joining, VC has gone from a cottage industry to something, we were talking about commodity, to look for all of us to look ourselves in the mirror and say VC has become almost a commodity industry where money has been so easily accessible. There's so many people that have come into this industry now that you need to create a brand just like you do in consumer goods to really stand apart. And then there's people who create brands well and people who don't create brands well. So it's interesting to see where like the axes of competition or advantage shifts. And I think it's been really interesting to watch how different people adapt. But it's sort of like one of those old fashioned ways of thinking. Like if you have a really good idea, why would you put it out in the world for everyone to hear about it? You just want to execute against it. But maybe that just means there's no good ideas left and we all just have to compete on brand.
It's all execution. I do think there's something uniquely weird about venture brand building. Like Sally, you mentioned reporters, like they're usually communicating what they're interested in. We talked about Serena, like an athlete who has like that brand. Like if you think about media or, you know, sports, like people are building brands based on like a very visible work product and achievements. Venture is so strange because most people don't have the luxury of building a brand around track record, right? Because it takes so long. I mean, the luckiest thing you can do is like have invested in Uber seed because Travis was your buddy, and then you build your entire venture brand and internet persona around that. That's not a, maybe it is a subtweet. But for most folks, like you have to figure out, how do I build a brand before I am like on the Midas list and a legendary investor? And that leads people in some very like different directions, right? A lot of it like thought leadership, putting like your thinking out there.
Ashley, that's a really interesting point, because I feel like there's a feedback loop with a lot of those activities that you just don't get in venture, especially early stage. So like, you're not going to know whether you're good at this job for 10 years. So if you're somebody that like needs a lot of validation along the way, like having a tweet take off, or like a blog post, get a bunch of distribution and get your name out there. Those are like quick early wins that make you feel like you're doing a good job. And I think some people, they really need that. And I think especially as venture's gotten bigger, it's sort of like widen the aperture for like the types of people that tend to like go into the field. Whereas I feel like when it was a cottage industry, people knew that they were self-selecting for, a path where it's a get rich slow game, right? Like, and you just got to be very, very patient, and you can't need like a lot of that external validation. But now, I think that it's fair to say within venture, like it's gen pop, which is funny to say, but I think that that's true.
I mean, my hunch would be like, if you tried to plot like social activity and returns, it would be a very strange chart. Maybe like a barbell there, right? Where there are a bunch of people who are early.
Totally. At AngelList, we really, we have a killer data. We had a killer data science team at AngelList, and that was like, that was one that like, I hope they still are working on, or they'll publish soon. But somebody asked a question of like, to what extent does the number of followers you have on social media like correlate to like your track records, performance track record?
Or can it be predictive, right, for the folks who are earlier? And I mean, I think the answer is sometimes yes, a lot of times no. But yeah, it is very, especially.
Ashley and Helen and Mac, I'm curious, like, can you think of a recent investment that you guys have made that was a result of a social media post or a connection? Because you guys, I think, have a lot of influence in Twitter and LinkedIn.
I think like it depends on the industry. So if there is like, I'll give you an example. There is one that specifically they're working on like a video editing software using AI, right? And so I think they were looking for investors who are more active in like the media space. And so I think like it kind of depends on like the type of product or company, that they're building. But yeah, that's kind of like the best example I could think of recently. Or like, I mean, I can imagine if you're tweeting about defense tech all the time, like Mac,
right,
like, you're going to get maybe angel investment opportunities.
I feel like if I tried to like, tweet to attract good deal flow, it wouldn't work. And what actually ends up happening is it's my really dumb Twitter jokes that like people see. And then I think like half the battle, more than 90% of the battle, is just having people think of you. Right. Like that is like truly. And this was something I learned back in my communications career, and why I was active on Twitter, where a lot of PR people strangely are not. It's just like being top of mind, whether it's for a journalist working on a story and like, oh yeah, doesn't she? Oh yeah, Box or Glossier, or whatever company I was working at the time. And seriously, like if I have a good tweet, and again, like it's my stupidest, like silly tweets, I'll get a lot of pings, and it's not because that tweet was like some brilliant take on an emerging category. It's just people are like, oh, Ashley, like maybe she would want to look at this, or maybe she'd be interested in what I'm building. So I realize that makes me sound absurdly unstrategic, but then I will say my other point is I think this only works when you enjoy it, when it's authentic. Like I think you can tell when people are like trying too hard to like put content out there and build a brand. And I know there's like we're in this like pro agency, like it's okay to be cringe moment. And I agree with that to some extent. But I also think like the cringe that is good is when it's cringe coming from a place of like, I'm doing this because I love it, I believe in it, like I'm having fun.
Yes, because I think anybody who's worked in comms knows that like if that's going to be part of your strategy, like consistency is really important. And the only way it's going to stay consistent is if you like don't hate it, right? If it's like the thing that you like don't look forward to every day, or the thing that you like least look forward to, like it's going to be really hard for you to be consistently using that channel or like putting yourself out there. But yeah, if you enjoy it,
I just figured it out. We need to build an AI app that creates tweets for VCs. Like, how many subscribers would we get for that? That would, I feel like
I think like everyone is already using like ChatGPT to write their,
100%.
I mean, especially LinkedIn. I think like 90% of LinkedIn is like AI posts
terrible.
for sure.
I will say one strategy that I think is uniquely to this time versus like a decade ago is a lot of the like emerging fund managers publishing their LP letters or fundraising decks. Like Sarah Guo has done that recently. Nicole Wishoff has, tweeted about her fundraising deck. So I think that's a really interesting.
But even like larger firms, more established ones that aren't emerging managers are doing that too. So I think
that's
like,
true.
Where will we see that trend sort of like stop? So I think like I saw Josh Wolf share like Lux's, quarterly letters. Slow Ventures is very transparent about, what they share with their LPs. But like, yeah, I feel like there were some other examples too. Mac, what were you going to say?
I completely forget. Oh, you know what it was? It was like, you were like, I'm sure if you're tweeting about defense all the time, you probably get interest in deal flow that's interesting. And what I will say is that the more I tweet about defense, the more random crypto scams I get in my inbox. Like, it's not, I actually think like to an earlier point, and I forget who said this, but like, I think people are really good at sniffing out what's written by AI, what's real, to a degree, and like who's in it because it like makes them excited, who has like interesting ideas, who actually wants to engage with things, versus like just building a brand for the sake of making yourself bigger. I think people are okay at figuring that out. And I don't think that like, I think I could tweet all day. I mean, there are things that I genuinely do want to talk about in defense that I think is really fucking exciting, but I don't think it's a,
and you should do
I don't think it's like a deal.
Excited.
I don't think it's like effective. I think that there are probably significantly more effective ways to get like really high quality deal flow than tweeting exclusively as your primary strategy. So, especially on a niche topic, and especially in one that's so concentrated, like if my number one right now, we're not building and it were about generating deal flow, there's a lot more in-person stuff that I would go do. So
that sounds scary. In person sounds scary.
Should we head to the questions?
Yes, sounds great. Okay, well, insert ad voice. This Q&A is brought to you by Mercury, the fintech used by over 200,000 startups to simplify their finances. And so we have a few questions from the audience, and I think some just general ones that we've heard. One that I'm going to kick off with, because we have so many great marketers in the house, is we have our first product launch for my company. It's a seed stage, but we have customers. What's the best way to get press for the launch?
I think the old way of thinking about this was like, I need an article in TechCrunch, or you have some idea of what the end product is, but always start like, what is the audience you want to reach? Like, where do you think they are? And then construct your whole strategy around that. It might end up being TechCrunch if your like goal is to hire your next engineers, to attract like VCs for your next round. And then like do your homework to figure out like what reporters have written about this space before. Like, will they cover product launches? It's actually like quite hard to get a product launch covered unless it's like big and shiny. So you might need to bundle that with like your fundraise announcement, etc. But the universe of people for any given story is much smaller than I think most people assume. Like usually there are maybe like 5 people in the world who would cover, especially if it's early stage, a product announcement. And so just do that up front. And then remember that their job is not to market your product. Their job is to help share something interesting with their readers. And so frame what you're doing in a bigger context, that like, why should people care? Why is this relevant?
One additional point to that, I think it's important which publication for what product launch. So if you are trying to target more customers or you're trying to get it in front of investors, that's going to be a very different publication. So it might be The Information versus TechCrunch, but it might be Variety if you're looking for, like, in my case, like studio folks that want to get aware of like your product that you're launching. Mac, next one.
Amazing. As an early stage founder, should I invest in going to different conferences?
Mac, you have a take on this.
Yeah, I do. I think it's actually weirdly similar advice to what Ashley just said, which is think about what your purpose is in going to a conference. If it's about brand build, like, I think conferences can be very useful tools if you know exactly what you're using them for, and they can be a colossal waste of money if you don't. I also think, and someone brought this point up over the group chat, but a lot of the times you don't actually need to go to the conference itself. A lot of the times you don't need, especially if it's these massive conferences like in FinTech Money 2020. Sometimes you just need to go get a hotel in Vegas and you can do a lot of events and just go to the parties and you don't have to pay the conference fee, especially if you're early stage. It may not be worth your money.
Yeah, plus one to that, I will say I have been a part of the early marketing team at a handful of startups where, we just didn't have the budget. And like we would throw a bunch of backpacks filled with swag on like some salespeople and like just like send them to the conference and just have them figure out how to get in somehow. There was a lot of badge sharing. We're not condoning illegal activity here. And you just got to get really scrappy. And so like bigger companies than yours also do that. So I think that you just have to be there. And like, Ashley, you're at Upfront. Like, I know a lot of people who are at Upfront this week who don't necessarily have a ticket to Upfront. It's really expensive, but it's probably a collection of, a really great group of folks that, are flying into town and, good use of time to be there.
I'm the nerd who actually has a ticket, but I have very clear objectives. And I will say also, if you're going to go to a conference, what I have found is it's so much better if you've had touch points with everyone you want to see beforehand, and then you get to like meet them in person versus trying to like cold introduce yourself. Because I think, one of the hardest things in these like, Zoom first days is like human connection really matters. But if you can sort of have that interaction first and then like go find them, say hi, like it's like a much better flow.
Okay, next question. We have grown to 10 people and are about to go to market. Is it too late to change the name of our company?
Ooh.
How bad is the name? That's the question.
Names are so emotional. So it's like, it's so hard to change. I think it's important when you start to have customers, but if it's still like internal, I don't think it matters as much. I'll say one thing about my last company. We had a company that had a very similar name that sent us a cease and desist letter. And it was such a hard decision for us. We ended up deciding to keep it, but it's so emotional. So if you're not emotionally attached to it and it's still very much internal, then I think it's a good time to switch.
My best advice is to actually just go talk to a founder who has recently changed their names. And because I've done that, and like unanimously, they said, we thought it would be so hard, but actually it was super easy. And here's how much it cost all in. So like, I think it's, it is, to your point, very emotional, but like the nuts and bolts of it are often like pretty straightforward. And so, yeah, the faster you kind of get over that emotional hump. And I also just met a founder last week who did a name, like a consumer app founder, and she did the name change. And she said she was like really attached to it. And her co-founder was pushing them to do so. And now she's like really.
Is this the one we know?
Yeah.
And I love the new name.
Ditto.
Yeah.
I mean, Facebook did it, and they are definitely not, a 10-person.
Yeah, so you can do it at all stages. All right, I think that's a wrap.
This was fun.
All right, guys, that was a great chat. If you guys enjoyed that, catch us again next week for another great chat. And be sure to check out our website and submit any questions you have for their rapid fire.
And that website is anothergreatchat.com.
And just a natural.
So smooth.
Thank you.